I want to talk about a couple of models of learning. I guess it's learning from failure or preventing failure, accident mitigation. Because I think it's really relevant to some of the things that are going on right now in culture in terms of understanding them. One of them, and if you don't know me, I'm Professor Dave Massack. I'm Associate Professor of Innovation Strategy and Entrepreneurship, and I created this whole Reciprocity Project to give back as much as I possibly can. There's so many people that help me out that I want to pay the favor forward to help you out. So I'm probably known academically for a learning from failure person and understanding learning from failure, disasters and those kind of things. There's a couple of models that are pretty relevant that I think are just interesting, and so you can kind of understand some of these things. And by the way, I'm eating carrots at the same time because I'm just going from place to place. And if this is the first time on your podcast, it's very informal and all that kind of stuff. So what it is, it's so one of the models that you might have heard about, but probably not, it's called the Swiss cheese model. It's really relevant to what's going on right now in culture with, particularly COVID-19, right? And that there are multiple layers of protection. So the model goes like this. And I think it's James Reason that first invented it. It's from England. And it's not necessarily like a model, but it's more of like imagery. And you can imagine, like, if you have Swiss cheese on a sandwich, and there's layers of Swiss cheese. Each layer has holes in it, and the errors or problems can happen, and they get through those holes, right? So you can get, wherever it is, contamination can go through those holes, and there can be a break in the system. But if you have multiple layers of Swiss cheese, it gets really hard for failures or problems to actually happen when you have that. And the more layers you have that are overlapping and interconnecting, the more that you're going to prevent problems from occurring. So that's one model. A second model is kind of similar in terms of redundancy, and this is more of from systems dynamics, I guess, would be, or an engineering perspective, where you have more redundancy in the system, and each sort of module are working independently, but you create modules that, by default, if they fail, it doesn't take down the system, and you actually have redundancy of the same modules that are propagating and allowing things to happen. And that model doesn't work necessarily so well to sort of explain this particular phenomenon, but it explains, it's sort of the backbone behind the internet, or how, software systems work. Another model that we have is a learning from failure model, and this is kind of a dynamic that, or a model that I know pretty well. It's based on sort of behavior reinforcing. It's called reinforcement learning model, where you try something, and if it doesn't work, you try something different. You sort of iterate towards something that eventually works over time. So we've got these overlapping models, and there's a couple of more models that are out there, but those are some of the bigger ones. Oh, there's one more called the normal accident model by Charles Perrow, and that model sort of suggests that there is disasters, sort of catastrophic, what's called the normal accident, can happen, and it's generally talking about sort of catastrophic disasters, and they can happen because of the way that things overlap with systems, and you can't predict those things. It's interconnections, and more sort of complexity causes more problems to actually occur, and that kind of explains where we've had some of the problems, why we've had a pandemic in the first place. We have a complex system. and there's going to be a break point at some point, right? Like you can sort of try to mitigate as much as you can, but you get kind of confident, and this confidence can cause problems. That's not necessarily part of the normal accident model, but that's sort of one thing that you have to consider. But we've got all of these models that explain failures or disaster. Sorry, an ambulance just went by. It explains, failures and disaster that might happen, and we have to, recognize that none of these models explain everything completely. That none of them are perfect. None of them are explaining the phenomenon completely. And so we have to borrow from these different models to explain them. And sometimes one works better than the other. And that's kind of how science actually works, is that we have more of these sort of imagery on how things actually work. And we often can borrow and trade off different models. And this is at heart is sometimes why science itself actually is faulty, because we can sort of trade off these different models whenever we can't explain things with something else. But it's also sort of the generative nature of how things actually work, right? Like there's not one true way to perceive something. And I think we have it's problematic to view the world that there is one kind of, one type of knowledge that is end all and be all, which is sort of deeply rooted with the scientific method. And it's somewhat problematic to assume that there is one piece of valid knowledge, valid and reliable knowledge that's out there. In fact, the world is complicated, right? And a complicated world means that we should probably have multiple, modes of investigating and I forget what they call it in medicine, but like multiple ways to sort of tackle multimodality, right? Like to tackle the same problem. And, that's what we should maybe try to explain. I think this would be a really nice explanation. Should be somewhat built into, elementary school education to explain some of these things, or even high school education to explain some of these things, so we can, when problems happen, people can maybe have a conversation about this openly and discuss it. I think that this would be really wonderful. So with that, that's all I wanted to talk about. That was my insight right now. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.